Alright, this is going to be my first review of a RedCat RC. This is the current model, Blackout XBE. This would be the brushed model. Comes with a 550 size brush motor with heatsink and a regular NiMH battery. Now, the radio system is a 2.4 gigahertz, which is pretty common. So, let's just get around this thing. I've raced it and tumbled it quite a few times, so there's quite a bit of battle damage. But, except for the top part that I ripped off because I was a little overzealous, this thing is pretty much a tank. I mean, it's plastic, but it's all givable, like even the front bumper. Everything looks plastic, everything looks cheap, right? Everything has a purpose though. Look at that. That gives, so you don't break the front bumper. I'm not sure if that's common on all RCs, but on this one, it makes quite a bit of difference. Even on the chassis mount, or the body mount, I'm sorry. This thing gives quite a bit. Otherwise, I would have broken this thing off quite a long time ago. And if you notice, which I have never seen on any RC, when this thing is closed, it locks on either side and on top and on the back. So this basically turns into a full rigid roll cage, which again, I've never seen on any RC. Now, that being said, for the price that this thing costs, which is, you know, not that bad, and it's actually not bad at all, there is a couple of issues. And they're not bad at all either. The shocks. The shocks come, and if you're not going to do any major jumping, or, you know, you're just going to, you know, play around in the grass or something, sure, the shocks are good. But any amount of jumping and you're going to run into problems. Quick solution: unbolt them, spend $3.99, get you some Team Losi, or it doesn't really matter the brand, 60 weight shock oil. I've already rebuilt every shock, and the difference is night and day. Like, this thing jumps, it handles, it is almost perfect. One other thing, and this is just a personal preference. This thing comes without holes. It's the good old battery box. The battery itself gets pretty warm. Not sure if that's a major concern, but I put holes in this thing. It took me all of 2 or 3 minutes after one screw in the top comes off. Now the battery stays give or take about 15 degrees cooler. Motor still gets hot. I will say one thing. The heatsink, when I first got the motor, or the RC, sorry, it was covering up these holes. If you notice, it's movable. Move it all the way back and clock it ever so slightly to the side. This will make sure it got maximum cooling and maximum heat dissipation. Also, I've done a little bit of modification here, but we're not going to get into that because that's just a personal preference. But I'm going to say, for the price, this thing is hard to beat. I mean, pre-glued tires, I mean, you know, the shocks are perfect now. And when I took it to my local track, you know, this only being a 1/10 scale, most of the 1/8 guys were, I wouldn't say making fun of me, but they were slightly and silently making fun of this little thing. And you know, they were like, oh, it's a RedCat, it's cheap, and yada, yada, yada. Well, you know, one of the guys was like, so why don't y'all do a drag race? I was like, okay, that's cool. You know, why not? Lined them up. How about this thing outbeat $1,000 cars or trucks, however you want to put it, in a drag race, and they didn't have a chance of even catching up. This thing, when it launched, just that the back end sunk down through just rooster tails of dirt from all four wheels and took off. And I wouldn't say a lot of respect was gained, but they didn't say anything bad about the model anymore. Because when I got there, in their mind, this was a Hyundai. They were racing Ferraris. Well, this little Hyundai with its plastic roll cage and its plastic body, well, I'm just going to have to say, beat the pants off all of their full aluminum bodies and all this other stuff. And we're just going to get into the quality real quick. If you noticed, when I first got it, I'm just going to veer off a minute, I wasn't real happy. Like, I didn't say anything, but I wasn't real happy because it's plastic. Most of the only metal is right here. But if you really look into this little model, it's built specifically for that. Like this little piece right here. It's a plastic bumper guard. Well, you'd think. Until you hit something. Guess what? It flexes. It keeps you from breaking parts. This little piece back here flexes, which the whole thing is flexible. Cheap, right? You would think. All this is rigid, but all this other stuff is flexible and cheap, right? You would think. Until you shut it. Tab here, tab on the other side, locks in the back, locks in the front. This becomes the body itself. It just doesn't become a cover. This entire roll cage becomes one with the body and is very, very strong. I have flipped it, I've tumbled it, I've hit jumps that would think that would just total this thing. Well, you got some battle damage here, but all of it is rugged. It's glass reinforced nylon bottom, plastic upper. See, one of them has already locked. Glass reinforced A-arms and plastic upper support. And if you really look at the Blackout models, what is this? Is this just cheap manufacturing? This thing is cheap, right? No, it's not. This keeps you from having to buy so many parts. Say you run into something and rip this entire section off. Guess what? This section is the same as this section. If you have spare parts, then this rear section or even this section will fit anything. That includes these upper arms, these lower arms, the steering hubs, pretty much the entire suspension from front or back is adaptable. Now, you might think that that's just cheap manufacturing. Well, think about it this way. If you have to stock all these parts, then you have to stock a front right, front left, rear right, rear left, right? Wrong. You stock a few of these, and no matter which one you break, you can put it back together. Now, that being said, look at that. This is thick. I mean, you might break it. I'm sure somebody will. Hell, I'm sure somebody will break this part right here, which is kind of strong but highly flexible. But guess what? These parts are cheap to buy anyways. The parts are interchangeable. The shocks are you know, interchangeable front to rear. The tires, wheels. I mean, this thing is meant to cheaply repair. But quality, on the other hand, is not real bad. If you're just getting into this hobby, this thing is more than adequate. If you're already into the hobby, this thing is more than adequate. Now, say you want to put a LiPo in here and a brushless motor and a brushless ESC. I don't know how it would perform because the race I was speaking of earlier, I beat in a drag race LiPo brushless models, and they didn't have a chance of even catching up. So this thing would be an absolute monster if you were to replace this, replace the motor, or replace the ESC and replace the battery. This thing would be an absolute monster. So it's my first review of any type of truck. Probably not the best, but I can't seem to find anything really wrong with it other than a probably $5 worth of mods in about 30 minutes of your time. Anyway, have fun.